Today, I have the privilege of being joined by Kyra Stephenson, and she is a nature-based educator based in New York and Rochester area. And we're very privileged to have her on. And so, welcome to the program.
Lee, thank you very much. Thanks for having me. I'm excited for our discussion.
Well, likewise. Well, I thought we would get started. If you could just tell us a little bit about your background as it relates to nature-based education, and also a little bit about yourself growing up and how you got into doing this type of work.
Sure. I'll say that I was privileged to be in a family that uh, utilized the outdoors as much as possible. Whether it was when I was living for a period of time in the city of Philadelphia, and my dad would take us to the parks and kind of go creek walking and looking for snakes, to my mom was actually a therapeutic horseback riding instructor. And so there was a period of time where I was kind of let free to roam the fields and maybe take a pony or two out on some trails and get in some trouble into the woods with some some horses and up in the barn looking for barn cats, and to grandparents that thought it was important that we learn to ski as children. And so, looking back, it was an incredibly privilege to be able to have access to these natural spaces. And just, that was kind of what we did was time playing outside and allowed to explore and climb trees and things like that. And um, it wasn't until partway through my college years when I had gone to George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia, and thought I wanted to pursue a career in law or government and politics, and realized kind of quickly that that was not what I wanted to do. And as many of us do, you kind of, bounce around and figure out, where am I supposed to be and what am I supposed to do and what my interests are. And there's a program at George Mason called New Century College that had just started. And I was able to kind of transfer into that college at the university and was connected with a professor, Dr. Tom Wood. And a lot of our classes, I remember one of my first classes was a conservation biology and English class combined. It was like a 6 credit class.
Oh,
And
wow.
I remember thinking, well, this makes sense because now, now I'm reading and writing about things that I actually care about. And throughout the different classes, I was able to go on all these different experiences, from bear tagging black bear down by Virginia Tech to studying oysters in the Chesapeake Bay to actually, for about 6 weeks, we did a class on Andros Island in the Bahamas. And for an internship towards my senior year, I remember saying to him, I'll do anything as long as it's not with birds. For whatever reason, and to this day, I can't remember why I had a disdain for birds at the time, because that's not true now. He said, okay, and called me in for a meeting, and I ended up working with trumpeter swans. So it just goes to show that sometimes, life has other plans for you and you just got to go with it.
Yeah.
So I was able to work with this incredible scientist, Dr. William Sladen, who had done research in Antarctica and worked with penguins and was working with um, swans and had done some work with geese from the movie Fly Away Home. If
Mm.
you're familiar with that, the idea is that you have these birds that will imprint on humans and then they fly behind a ultralight plane, and we could then teach migration patterns to populations of migrating birds that may have lost um, the migration route from their generations past, that had gone extinct from that area or something like that. So I was the biologist on the project, Trumpeter Swan Migration Project. And that actually led me a couple years after that into teaching science and becoming a science teacher. And so nature was, I want to say, already part of my fabric. And I loved biology and I loved getting kids excited about biology and I've always loved animals. And so would at different times have different animals in my classroom or made sure to try to create experiences for students that were getting them connected in nature somehow, whether it was field trips or my first couple of years of teaching, I was at an alternative high school where we had our own canoes and we did some camping trips and things like that. And that nothing beats sitting around a campfire with a group of students, talking about life.
Yeah.
And so spent years just being a science teacher and did a little bit of earth science, but a lot of what we call a New York State living environment, though it's now switched back to biology. And um, it wasn't until I was part of the New York State Master's Teacher Program. And it's a professional program, a professional development program for teachers in the STEM fields in New York State, and it's kind of rooted in some really valuable professional development. And you meet monthly. And on the way to one of our monthly meetings, I was listening to a podcast and heard Richard Louv talk about nature deficit disorder. And it was one of those moments in time where you remember where you were, what you were wearing, what you're doing, And that was the moment where I was like, this is it. This is something I need to really dive into. And I think what I was seeing in terms of changes in students over the last few years before that was a disconnect with just simple observations and understandings of processes in our natural world that older students were lacking and trying to figure out, where is this coming from? Why are they not understanding kind of simple concepts of how things happen on our planet, and is it the cell phone thing or, what's going on? And when I heard Richard Louv talk about nature deficit disorder, I was like, it felt like all the pieces were coming together. So I asked when I got to my meeting that day, hey, does anybody want to read this book, Last Child in the Woods, and create kind of a team of teachers that would dive into this and try different things in our different schools. And these are teachers that were coming from rural schools, suburban schools, urban schools, high need, all over the place. So we could really look at different things from elementary all the way up to, high school physics and chemistry and things like that. And that's what kind of kickstarted, I think, my passion for nature-based learning and the value that I believe it can have on our students' education itself, and then the future in terms of sustainability and protecting our planet. Um, and I can go in more, but I'm trying to shorten it a little bit in terms of
Well, no,
40
yeah,
some years there, but
that's a fantastic introduction, and a couple of things came to mind there. One was that I've heard this from others as well, which, you know, it's something now that unfortunately has become commonplace, but it's really striking if you stop and think about it, where people say, I grew up, my dad was a farmer, or my mom, and I was really privileged to be, and you would have never heard that probably 70 years ago, even maybe 40 years ago, because that's just what most humans, a few exceptions, that's what they did, and they wouldn't have used that language, kind of like Native Americans, don't have a term typically for wilderness, right? It just was, right? It was their environment. And now we hear that a lot. And so then, hearing you cite Richard, Louv's work, Last Child in the Woods, yeah, it makes perfect sense because that, unfortunately, that isn't the norm for many people, particularly kids nowadays. And so, having that epiphany, that moment like that, is something that, I keep hearing over and over again. So it's sort of sad, but at the same time, it means people are realizing it.
Mhm.
And in your case, doing things about it. Um, so you took all of that, which is fantastic. It's a wonderful journey. And tell us a little bit about your current school, like where it is and how your specific role you got started in that and some of the programs that you do now, how you run those.
So, uh, obviously this started to happen just before the pandemic, and I was gifted a classroom at my previous school that is just outside Rochester, New York, in Greece, New York, that had a greenhouse and a courtyard area that it opened right up into. And so I gathered two really good friends, one with a truck, and we collected boulders and stumps of wood and built an outdoor classroom. And one of the assistant principals was so supportive, he actually built a frame for a whiteboard outside, and it was one of those like, uh, don't tell and ask for forgiveness before permission, that kind of thing. So luckily, the administration of my school kind of had already known how I roll, and they were like, "We're not surprised," and utilizing this outdoor classroom. So started to do more research in nature-based learning, got connected with a wonderful human being, Chris Widmeyer, who is the CEO and director of Rochester Ecology Partners here in Rochester, New York, and really started to talk about, what nature-based learning is. I attended the Children Nature Network conference, and in the middle of all this, I was actually became very, very sick, 2020 into 2021, uh, with, now that we know, long COVID. And I can talk more about that, but part of my journey of healing had a lot to do with spending time in my backyard and becoming part of my nature, my natural
Mm.
community. Because what I was experiencing was so incredibly lonely and confusing, and so those trees and those birds were more important than they'll ever know. And coming out of the pandemic, a principal at the school that I'm currently at, it's the Anna Murray Douglas Academy, school number 12 in the Rochester City School District, called my friend Chris Widmeyer, and they talked about how to incorporate nature-based learning into their school. And when they looked at the schedule and things like that, they really came to the conclusion that they needed a science teacher that could teach a section of biology, but then also spend the rest of the time um, starting a nature-based learning program. And I got a call one morning in August, a couple years ago, and Chris said to me, "Hey, Kyra, you want to do something wild?" And I thought he was going to be like, "Can you help me take 30 kids kayaking, in like Ellison Park?" And so I'm like, "Sure, what's up?" And he says, "You want to quit your job and become a nature-based learning coach?" Um, to which I was like, "All right, this isn't funny. That's my dream job, and it doesn't even exist." And his
Correct.
words were, "Well, if you take this job, it will." So I
Wow.
called my husband because had just dropped my daughter off at lacrosse practice, and my husband says, "Why are you on the phone with me and not accepting this job? This is your dream job." So again, an epiphany moment, and did some soul searching and went and looked at the school, and it's located right near Highland Park, and part of Highland Park in Rochester is an Olmsted Park, and really felt, if this is the place where nature-based learning is going to start in this area the way that we think it should, there's no better place to do this. And it's so needed for so many students, but I especially felt in our urban schools.
Mm.
So took the job, and we started it October 2023. So this is kind of year three of the nature-based learning program at school number 12.
Wow, that is fantastic. Yeah, there's so many thoughts that come up when you talk about that. And was thinking Walden Pond, and you're like right in the midst of all that. Very Thoreau-esque. Yeah, my own sort of entry into education was kind of from the opposite end and the university side of things. But I had one professor in particular who sort of recruited me to teach these types of courses. And, she basically said something that you uttered, and that is, these kids just don't have these skills anymore, these field-based skills, and they've lost it. And as I went through my own process of growing up, I mean, I didn't grow up on a ranch or, in the woods, certainly not in the wild, but I was close to it. And I had a family that had a ranch, and my dad was always taking me fishing, et cetera. Um, I kind of see sort of three levels. There's like the science aspect, which is really good. And then there's, and we do reasonably good job. I mean, depending on where you are, I've teach that in school. But then there's the kind of master naturalist aspect, which is more just, a little more hands-on, general education, which I found fascinating when I did that over a decade ago. I mean, that was great and very enlightening. And to me, actually, I think the school system, this is just me opining here, but they jump straight into biology or all these things. It's like I would start with the master naturalists, or that was my thinking at the time, because it gives you, just a context, and it's really interesting. But then I went a further step, or I was lucky to have this door open for me, and this kind of more nature connection, these hands-on things, really touching, feeling, I hate to say using nature, but, being a part of it and accessing it. And then I was like, oh, actually, no, this is the way you get into it. And particularly for kids. And I just had a couple of really great experiences, particularly my daughter, just a couple of days ago on New Year's Day, and we were just out making some homemade camouflage, out of just some very basic materials like charcoal and caliche, and then she was, which is like crushed limestone, and she was just a couple hours later. We went out again, did a trail walk, and she was over there making her own, and it was just, like 3 hours passed, and
Mm.
no behavioral issues, a lot of stuff I totally normally deal with. Anyway, it's probably jumping ahead here, but I was like, oh, kids are just perfectly tuned for this, and cut out for this. So, having said all of that, what is your kind of idea, or if you could give a definition of nature connection, what that means, and it's how that's related, or how that fosters a relationship to the natural world, and maybe a few examples of, in your own work, what that means.
Uh, I feel like I always keep coming back to time and space. Um, and I love that you brought up naturalist as well, because the conversations we have with students, we really talk about what a naturalist is, and I'll
Mhm.
come back to that. Because I think when I think about a connection with nature, and what I've seen with our students, and our school currently is a pre-K through sixth grade. When I first started there, it was pre-K through eighth grade. And the district has reconformed so that seventh and eighth graders are now in their own buildings. Um, is when students are given the time and obviously the space, and I we do have an indoor space. I turned my classroom into a nature center. Um, and you just allow that time for a student to touch something, to listen to something, and pull in their senses, right? But bring awareness to their senses. Um, the connections automatically happen. And what's so amazing is to see how different kids connect with different things. So kids will feel like, hey, my feet feel different. I'm standing, look, I'm leaning back, right? Because they're standing on a slope. Or the kids that look up, hey, that cloud looks like a hippopotamus. Or oh, can I touch that tree? Because they're attracted to the texture, you know. And so when I think about the connection, and for me, creating a helping students create that connection, and I dare I say a deep connection. I hope we're sparking that deep connection. I
Mhm.
don't know yet. We're getting there. I think you need deeper
It takes
connection is
time.
right. It takes
Yeah.
time, you know, um, and it comes differently for different people, you know. But at least that connection piece of that awareness, um, and uh, allowing kids that time to have the wonder and the awe. And we talk a lot about having a reciprocal relationship. So we talk about that things are living beings. And the culture shift that we've seen in the school this year is I love hearing the kids say, hey, remember that's a living being. Or don't pull on the branch. Remember that tree is a living being. And they're not just saying it to name it, they're saying it because they now value that other living organism differently than they ever did before because of the awareness they now have due to the time and the space that our program has provided for them.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, there's like a conscious recognition that these aren't just external things that are, just not saying there aren't resources and uses, of course there are, but there's more to it than that, a lot more to that, and being cognizant of that and present to it and valuing it. And I like the way you use the term reciprocal. I was just thinking again, sorry, that same just a couple of days ago, my daughter and we were coming home, and it's amazing too. You're talking about deep nature connection, and it takes some time, but and I'm not a child educator, full disclosure, but it's amazing what kids will pick up
Mm,
sometimes and then reflect back to you at a later time. And so we were walking home, and I happened to live in an area where there's just all kinds of deer, white-tailed deer everywhere. And it's in a neighborhood where my family lives, and walking back, and we saw some around dusk. We were walking, and I try to encourage being quiet, and
yeah,
silence a lot. Um, and we're walking, and suddenly there were some deer ahead of us, about, I don't know, 50 meters or something. And my daughter's like, shh. She did that, and she turned around, and she's like, you're moving too much. And then this is something I'd gone over with. She's like, they can't see. She's only 5. She's like, they can't see you if you move fast. She's like, you have to move just like this. And she turned her head really slowly like this. And I just told her that a few days earlier. I like couldn't believe it. And then
yeah,
she proceeded the next 10 or 15 minutes to slowly walk up to these deer, and
yeah.
got to one within about 10 meters or something. But I mean, it's just amazing what they'll absorb and run with, with even limited exposure. So I just really was glad to hear you say that. And also one other thing, which I think you're kind of a little bit getting to, but I know it's something John Young mentions. He refers to it as unstructured playtime is
Oh
so
yeah.
important for kids in nature. It's like, yeah, you give them something, but then you kind of have to, let them do their own thing and, maybe monitor from a distance, but, not just have everything where you're pulling all the strings and, like so much the classical school system, do this, do that, on this defined schedule, et cetera.
That is I'm glad you brought that up because that's uh part of what it is, is that nature play, we call it. And then um we've I have experiences where we take kids outside and we've this great big hill, and they call it Big Bertha, and when we get snow we can sled Big Bertha and things like that. And um I try to always nature-based learning classes it were like the yes class. Yes, you can play with a stick, pick up a stick or use the stick, but in giving them boundaries. I always kind of talk in terms of like safety and boundaries. And so there's times where, yeah, let's run up and down the hill, let's roll down the hill. But then what's amazing is to have that same group of students who might be running and loud and having just complete joy of being outside and playing, have that same group of students understand that if we can walk with our fox feet and we can go slow, we can actually see the rabbits that are next to our school, and okay, we've seen their tracks, but now what is our behavior and how do we enter their spaces where they don't have fear and we might be able to see them. And so having both of those experiences with classes is amazing. And that is, something where I'm working on coaching with the teachers in terms of having time that's not, you can't script every minute because you don't know what's going to go by. Is the hawk going to go by? Um, you know, is somebody going to find a ladybug or a bee or whatever, or just be interested in something? And so giving students time to, hey, can we go this direction, and allowing that to naturally happen is so valuable. I've themed out each grade levels, and the pre-K and the kindergarten, it really is about nature play and just
Mm.
getting our bodies moving and experiencing being outside, and why is it, how are we different? What's it feel like? Just before we went on Christmas break, it was snowing, and took a group of kids outside, kindergarten, and line leader is very important with elementary students. Line leader is very important. So this kid was already excited because he was the line leader. And we open the door and we step out of the threshold, and there's snowflakes hitting our face. And he takes a big breath in because we talked about breathing a lot, and breathes in, he breathes out, and he goes, "Oh, I just love snow." And I was like, "Me too, buddy. Me too." And that's just a great way to kick off, what we were just about to go do, in our green space next to our school.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because I love that term, nature play. And I think I've heard you use another term before, which I also really love, radical joy. So what do you mean by that? How does that come about? How does that relate to, what we're currently talking about with regards to kids being, or anybody, adults as well, being in nature?
All right. So I kept saying, uh, gosh, there's so much joy every time I'm teaching doing a nature-based learning class, and I can get into the logistics of how we do it, but ideally it's like a co-teaching situation, and they are aligned with different standards. So kids are doing math outside, they're doing social studies, they're reading, they're writing, there is science, there's art, and I kept saying, gosh, there's so much joy. There's so much joy, which says something when I've been teaching for years and there's a lack of joy, even it, and I'll own it. My own classroom, right? As
Sure.
an educator, you're like, man, the joy is just not here today or this week or whatever. And the last couple of years, I myself have just been so happy, um, because I'm experiencing this joy on a daily basis. And I'm like, that word just isn't enough, like it is, but it isn't. And um, Ken Linebeck is the founder of the Urban Ecology Centers in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And I got to go out and visit the Urban Ecology Centers last spring. And just as like I said, all good things come around singing around a campfire. He was talking with us and the growth of nature-based learning. And he's like, radical joy. And I was like, that's the word. That's what I've been looking for. That's what I've been looking for. So I can't say it's my own term. I'm going to steal it from Ken. But when I think of radical joy, it's that explosion of curiosity. It is all of that energy
Mhm.
that is like unhinged from children, where they're asking so many questions because they're so excited that they don't even care about the answer. They just want to keep asking questions. And it's the moments when they notice something, like the frost on I had a student that brought me very gently, right, very gingerly in her hand. It was a red and green leaf, and the way the frost had created this pattern on the outside of the leaf, you could tell it was something she had never seen before, and was so excited to just share it, right? Like just that all, and like, I have to share this such cool thing with somebody else. Um, it's noticing the simple things that you didn't pay attention to before. Um, it's those first moments. So rolling down the hill for the first time, or we have a lot of newcomers to this country where they've never seen snow before, or they've never seen the trees and the types of animals that we have. Here it's like you get annoyed by the squirrels and the groundhogs. Well, go outside with kids who have never seen a groundhog before and their minds are blown, right? So it's like me when I saw wolves in Alaska for the first time, um, and it's a collectiveness. It's being that shared experience um, with others, that it's just an explosiveness of that's why I call it radical joy, because it's not, it's bigger than joy. It's not the joy that we see on a holiday ornament, or whatever. So that's the coined term, and I'm going to stick with it.
I think you should. Absolutely. Well, following on from that, and obviously, it's not going to be like that all the time, but having a lot of those moments, what are some of the physical, mental, psychological benefits that you see in your students? And, how has that impacted their behavior? And both, if you can answer it this way, both in terms of at school, and their learning, but also just in, maybe out of school stories you hear, or, their relationships. You kind of spoke earlier a little bit about empathy with regards to the natural world, but what are some of those impacts, those benefits that you've seen, if you can qualify those?
No, and I'm glad you asked specifically in my students, because there's a ton of research on how spending time in nature affects your brain, your body, your physical, your mental health. And but we've been doing this a couple years now, and so we really are able to see different things with our students. One of the first things when I think about physically is when I first started, there was a lot of fear around going outside, and an apprehensiveness, even in terms of students moving their bodies on a what I would consider a gentle slope, and what it's like to walk um, on grass, on swampy, muddy ground, um, going up and down the hill, that like I said, is to me a gentle slope, and um, their brains and their bodies were not coordinated necessarily in doing some of these things. And if you think about, I think the average amount of time that kids spend outside is some crazy thing, like 8 to 10 minutes a day, depending on what you read. And that I know is true for some of our students. Um, they might live in an apartment building or a neighborhood where it's not necessarily safe to go outside, or they're new to the area, so they don't know where to go. And so students would say, I come to school on the bus, I go into school, I get back on the bus to go home, and I go inside. I had more than one student say to me at the beginning, "You're making me walk more than I do at Walmart." So that was the comparison, right? Um, and now students are asking to run up the hill or run down the hill, right? Rolling down the hill, moving their bodies faster. Of course, there's always conversations about climbing trees, and there is some risk play that is allowed. And that's a whole nother topic. Um, so I see a difference in their gross motor and then even their fine motor, because of the way that they are able to now know to slow their body down or be gentle with smaller nature things,
Mhm.
right? If you want to look at a seed, you have to be able to pick it up, and so physically, those are some of the general things. And then obviously just the breathing of the fresh air and the sunlight, which in
Mm.
Rochester in the winter, it's a little tricky. So the more we can
Yeah.
get them outside, the better, because we have a lot of gray days here in Rochester. And so if you think about what their brains are doing, they're accessing parts of their brains that don't get exercised. in terms of their, I think it's like their proprioception, how their body is in the space that they're in. Mentally, the fear is gone. There is there I was just telling somebody the other day, the weather here was pretty rough on New Year's Day, and I did a first day hike. And I said, I'm pretty sure every student at School 12 would follow us anywhere outside. It's the adults that get a little concerned about the wind and the weather and things like that. So the kids no longer have fear. They're not worried about as much mud on their clothes and their shoes, or where we're going or anything like that. The nature center has also become a place where students that are struggling with something want to go. They will seek it out. The nature center has two tortoise named Stiggy and Petunia, a corn snake named Wiggles, some hermit crabs. We've got a bunch of worms, tower gardens, I think some snails and some goldfish right now. And they know that if they're having a bad day, if they are frustrated, if they are angry, that the nature center is a place they know makes them feel better. And it's a place where as soon as they come in, they know that we practice breathing exercises. Okay, so come in and take some breaths, right? Become aware of how your body is responding. They will say that they feel calm during nature-based learning classes. And one of the words that they use that I love is they say they feel free.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Uh, yeah, so that the first time a student used that word, I stopped in my tracks because holy cow, for a child to say that this makes them feel free, as the adult, I counter it with, man, what are we doing to make them feel where they're not? Um, and in terms of behavior, there, I don't, I don't see behavior issues. Yes, there are classes that have to earn uh, further boundaries, right? Like, okay, if you want to go further, you got to show me that
Mm.
I can trust you to go this way or that way, or stay away from, the pond, whatever it might be, right? And so that does, there's certain things that take time, but in terms of individual students, I mean, this has a positive impact on basically every part of them holistically.
Wow, what a testament that is. Um, I was just speaking with someone this morning and they were talking about this a few years ago, but um, right here in Austin, Texas, um, at the Nature Science Museum here, it brought down a group of urban kids, and then there's a botanical garden next to it, and then a naturescape, and they were about to take them in there, and some of these kids literally stopped and like, okay, are there lions in here? I mean,
Mhm.
so it was lack of information, but there was this fear, right? And then you've clearly proven that that can be broken down. And not only can it be broken down, you can actually get the opposite end of that
Mhm.
fear, which is, this freedom, safety, expansiveness. That's amazing. I mean, that's what I feel like. I'm not gonna say all the time, but certainly my best moments in nature, and that's what I think we all aspire to when we're out in nature, among many other qualities that we get from it. But and of course, it's non-consumptive in that regard. You just need to be there. um, so wow, that's amazing. You alluded to something else previously too about having kids from different backgrounds. Can you speak about how your programming has or can break down barriers and being able to bring kids, different belief systems, backgrounds closer together so they can at least work together, if not being, just friendly and all part of the same tribe, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I started to utilize more this year than I have in the past is this idea of is saying to our students, this is a nature-based learning school. This is partially how we identify. We're a dual language urban elementary school that is now also a nature-based learning school. And so I started to dive into that word naturalist because when I think about a naturalist, they can do all the disciplines. There's naturalists that focus on math. There's naturalists that read and write. There's naturalists that study the history of people and places and other living things. There's artists, right, and creators. And so I really thought, you know what, this is a great way to talk about and give kids entry points into the academic piece that and I make fun of myself in terms of my own art, that my white-tailed deer looks more like a cow or barely, um and so we talk about, okay, I really want to try to journal, and all the kids have nature journals. And so when we're journaling and I'm trying to draw an acorn or whatever, obviously I'm going to use my labels because you can't tell it's an acorn or what size it is or anything like that. um but then I say to the kids who are the artists, man, like, look, you're our nature journalist in terms of your art, right? So you're going to take time and capture exactly what that acorn looks like. And that's your talent. Um, Versus somebody else who has all the factual information, on it. And so really talking about, all right, as we become naturalists, some of you are going to excel in this area and some of you are going to excel in this area, but we can all do this collectively. And what's really cool is that I don't have necessarily an academic assessment at the end of each class that I teach. And I talk about it in terms of, did you feel like you did enough today? If you didn't finish writing all of your sentences, but do you feel like you can come to a stopping point? Because with nature-based learning, we're never done, right? And we're going to keep exploring what the trees look like, or which birds are around, or we measured the amount of wood that we need for our raised bed, but we're not done it yet. So is today enough? And using that word enough. And so what I found with doing that is there's a confidence boost within the students and their ability to take more academic risk. Obviously we talk about physical risk about nature-based learning and climbing trees. That's one end of it. But in education, you want your students to be able to take risk. You want them to be able to ask questions or share ideas without the fear of being wrong. And in a world where we have so many assessments that are assessing right or wrong, I get to have the benefit where I don't have to assess right and wrong. I get to talk about what you know and experience and observe today and right now. And what that allows is an entry point for all of our kids. In my own experience, I was able to share something in nature with a student that doesn't speak any English, and I speak 20 words of Spanish. But we were able to share an observation about something in nature, and throughout spoken word, but with body language and our facial expressions, understand that both of us saw it, thought it was exciting, and then she could journal what she wanted in her nature journal about it, and I could do that at mine. And so we just had undergrad students at the U of R do some preliminary surveys of our students that speak predominantly Spanish. And one of the survey questions showed that they enjoy and they feel more successful in a nature-based learning class, which to me was so impressive and exciting because I don't speak Spanish. So my concern is, am I doing that a disservice because I don't speak Spanish? Now, granted, their classroom teacher that I'm teaching with speaks Spanish, but I myself felt is, my lack of being able to speak it, is that having a negative impact? And in fact, it's actually not. It's enhancing how they're feeling as part of our school community. And so showing kids that no matter who they are, there is a place for them within our nature, or our natural world, right? Or our nature-based learning community. From even, some really tough couple of last year and the year before, some really tough eighth grade kiddos, which if you've ever taught middle school, it's a whole
Mm.
different beast. And to see some, 6 foot big guys ready to go to high school, but they're very concerned about their plants that they were growing, that they gave them names to. You're like, all right, there's a little softer side. There's a special connection here, and that has so much value. So I've seen it break down in terms of, and we could talk in terms of our students with disabilities, that it's remarkable what we're seeing from a nonverbal student, a neurodivergent student saying the word tortoise was his first word, um, to, kids that struggle with reading, but they're a leader in terms of identifying, and being able to find where the hawk's nest was that we've been observing for a year and a half. There's just a place for everybody. And I think our kids feel it and they know it. And so their confidence level goes up. And from there, now you're talking about mental health, which is, a crisis in this country for sure.
Mm. You kind of mentioned a couple earlier, but can you talk about just a few, and I'm sure it varies every day, right? Time of season, et cetera, but some specific examples of nature-based activities that if they're recurring during the week or just in general, the kind of things you take your kids out to do and have them do.
Sure. So we changed the way that we're doing it a little bit this year. Our principal was really wanted to make sure that all of our students have nature-based learning. And the way it was started was kind of like an invitation for educators and teachers. And because obviously it's not a state mandate, I can't say everybody is doing nature-based learning. I would love to, but so the way we have it right now is our classes are on a 3-week rotating basis. So next week, for instance, fourth grade, I'll have fourth grade. There's 4 different classes, one on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. And um, next week, they are working on with some of our partners with New York State Parks, and um, one of our parents works for Climate Solutions Accelerator. So we're going to be co-teaching all of us a class together. So to kind of back up, there are lesson plans that have been written by grade level teachers, um, that I have incorporated with them in terms of nature-based learning. So there can be things that we've done in terms of decimals and adding and subtracting decimals, using measuring of objects that they have to build using sticks, right?
Mm,
So they'll come together as a team. They'll make a nature object out of sticks or pieces of nature that nature artifacts that they find. Then they have to measure them, add and subtract, and do a whole nature lesson, with doing math outside. Area and perimeter in terms of we need to know how much dirt we need for the raised garden beds that are at the community service. So some of those like basic um, things that tie in, but also then actually, so a really cool one we just did was form and function with second graders. And we've had second graders now doing biomimicry, which is the idea of scientists learning and engineers developing things based on form and function of things in nature. And just before the break, they did this awesome thing. And it's cool because the kids lead it too, right? So um, they were looking at seed disbursement. And so how do seeds, do they move by animal? Do they move by wind? Do they move by water or however like that? So we went out and they really were looking at different shapes and patterns and forms of the seeds to determine then obviously the disbursement. So some of these things are what they're already covering in class. And then our nature-based learning lessons, depending on how they fall within the curriculum, because we're on this 3-week loop, it is either an introduction into a topic, it is immersed right into the topic that they're looking at, or it's an enhancement or kind of an assessment at the end. We also, because each grade level is almost themed, from pre-K and kindergarten to being nature play to our sixth graders are partnering with Rochester Institute of Technology. They're part of their Cascade project, which is collecting data on macroplastics that are entering our stormwater drains. So every 3 weeks, our sixth graders are working with RIT and we're using what's called a Lita trap, which is like a plastic trap that goes in storm drains, collecting the plastic that goes into the storm drains, or this is preventing it from going into the storm drains. Based on the plastic that they have found, they are going to create a public service community action announcement or social media platform, like a TikTok about um, the plastics that have gotten into our stormwater. So, for instance, we're across the street from a hospital. If all that we're finding in our stormwater drains on our school property, let's say our medical mask, they're going to create using someone who works on branding and marketing is going to help them. They're going to make a public service kind of project to inform the hospital to stop putting their masks, in our in our
Mm.
stormwater. So it runs the gamut. It can be anything from books and words and language to something like sustainability and working with a top university in the area. Um, we've done others in terms of phonics and learning how to spell based and connecting it with the sounds that birds make.
Oh, wow.
So different different birds have different sounds, but then the birds also have different sounds that mean different things. And then also, just because they're different birds doesn't mean they don't understand what they're saying, right? And so how important language is and things like that. So it's hard to kind of nail down just a couple of different things, but um, every we have 100% participation. So every teacher, every class, every student, which is almost 800 students, is doing nature-based learning at School 12.
That's incredible. And this is in addition to, young kids or whatever you say, hey, let's pick up this ladybug and take a look at it, or they bring you caterpillar or whatever. Okay. Yeah.
Yes, that's on a
Wow.
daily basis. I mean, a second grader got off the bus a couple weeks ago and was distraught that the town or somebody cut down their rope swing, in the park. And she's like, I got to tell you, a nature lady. A lot of times they call me nature lady. I'm going to tell the nature lady and she's going to know how to solve this. And I'm so
That's great. Well, actually, I was going to ask you, do you have, I'm sure you have a lot, but even in just, the 3 or 4 years you've been doing this, do you have one or two really moving experiences, of children and, that you could share?
sure. Yeah, because I actually wrote this one down because I was like, I don't want to forget this one. And there's multiple, from, like I said, kids getting off the bus, walking through the hallways. Every day I get asked, when do we have nature-based learning? The kids always want to know when it's coming up. Um, but a couple things, I guess. Excuse me. Um, we have the tortoises that are in the nature center. And I try really hard to, that room is the nature center. It is a place that when we can't be outside, or we use both spaces really. So we talk about having calm body, calm voice when you come into that room, because there's other living beings in there. And it really kind of helps start with that connection and that respect of other living beings.
Hmm.
And so all the classes at some point meet, obviously, our tortoises more than the snake, because some teachers aren't a fan of wiggles. They weren't
Okay.
snake. The tortoises are a little
Understood.
bit
Yeah.
easier to
Primal
handle.
fear. Yeah.
Right, right. So um we sit in a circle and we do a lot with circles. I mean, we have rituals and routines that we really stick to with our programs. So we had a whole class sitting around and Stiggy, which is a leopard tortoise. So his shell is very yellow and it has this really pretty kind of brown pattern on the outside. And I use kind of like a rubbery plastic dog pool, really, to put the tortoises in, and then we kind of all sit around. That way, there's safe space for everybody, including the tortoises. So we're sitting around, and this one student, and I love watching the kids because they get down on a tortoise level, you know. And I was watching this one student who was new to our school, who had never seen Stiggy before, really just watching, and really got quiet and was getting as low and as close to Stiggy as possible. And I heard her say to herself, um, ah, eh, she said something like, I think I love you. And I was just watching her and she started to tear up. And, it was one of those moments you could tell in that child, like, what is happening? And so I kind of went over and I said, "Isn't he amazing?" And she was like, I can love him. And I was like, yes, yeah, like, yep, absolutely. And having that relationship and, that connection, like, that's powerful, for some of our kids, especially. So it's those moments where you see a student have that aha moment. And when we circle back to when we talk about nature-based learning and that connection piece and that time and space, being able to provide students with these experiences, that's like the it factor. Because whether it's the tortoise or I'll tell you another story. Just before our holiday break, the first grade teacher came running up to me and she's like, "I got to tell you something that happened." And she looked really stressed. And she said that her smart board was acting all crazy and she couldn't figure out why her smart board wasn't working. And the students were saying, there's a fly on the smart board. She's like, "It's December in Rochester. There's not going to be a fly on the smart board." And the kids are like, "No, there's a fly. The fly is touching the smart board and messing it up." So all of a sudden she sees the fly, and out of instinct, she hits the fly and the fly drops to the ground. And the whole class goes, "Oh!" And one little first grader says, "Miss, that was a living being." And so the first grade teacher says, "Well, I didn't mean to kill it. I just tapped it." And another kid says, "Oh no, you nailed it." And the first grader says, "I'm going to tell the nature lady." And so the teacher came to me because she's like, "These kids are going to tell on me and I don't want you to be mad at me." And I said, "Okay, I'm not that crazy. I understand that there's times in our lives
Exactly. Yeah.
where we've hurt a living being. you know,
Oh.
I've killed several mosquitoes myself." Um, and she's like, "Oh, you're not mad?" I go, "No." I said, it's a wonderful story because look at how the students
Mm.
reacted. And, we'll turn this into a restorative moment, after break. Well, I'll make you all come and go outside. We'll do something restorative because you killed a living being. So she's like, "That's a great idea." But to me, this is the long-term goal because I believe that this is what is going to change human behavior, right? This is what is going to drive how they consume things, the choices that they make, what they study, uh, you know, what they invent and discover, where they choose to live, who they choose to vote for, all of these different things that if we continue on a path where children are spending 8 minutes a day, there's no way this planet has a chance because we're relying on a generation to help protect and fix this planet, but they're not spending any time in it, so
Yeah.
they don't even know.
They won't value it.
Absolutely not. And so that moment with that student with Stiggy, you know, that is a life-changing moment. I saw it happen, right? That student was brought to tears out of love for something else besides a family member, right? And so I believe that that is something in that child that is going to have an impact. Um, the fifth grader that came back, at the beginning of this school year and said, Miss, when can we go out and check on the hawks? Because last year, his class, they figured out how to know where the nest was based on what they were finding on the ground, at the base of a tree, right? We had these two red-tailed hawks that always spend time above, the field next to our school. And, that was something that that child was thinking about all summer, and like getting off the bus and being, I got to go check on these red-tailed hawks. To kids that are techie kids, that biomimicry experiences of like, wait a minute, but we can invent things that could then fix this or could study this. Um, you just hear the conversations and you see the change in our school in just a short amount of time, that I believe that's going to be that lasting impact, that, this is something that I believe has to happen in order to have any impact on our planet.
I was just thinking as you were saying, I would love to follow up with you in 15, 20 years, 25 years to see how this has impacted them in their lives and what they've done with it. And, just in terms of their choices and, consumerist sort of mindset versus, other ways of at least somewhat mitigating, impact, but also protecting areas. That would be fascinating. Um, and I know that would be hard to track, but I would love to see that. Or more importantly, and I think this is a good way to finish up is, if you had this on a national level, and obviously I know you're not the only school doing something like this, although what you're doing maybe sounds like unique in some respects, but um, it really could and would have an impact and would be amazing to track that.
Mm-hmm.
And so if there's other people listening here, and how you got started or they're interested in this, in their local school, whatever, could you discuss a little bit maybe, how you could get started, some of the resources, requirements, do you have to do the whole enchilada kind of thing? I mean, it sounds like obviously you can do this in an urban setting. You don't have to be in a rural setting. And what would you recommend to them? Or I don't know, if your school has a website or anything you want to cite on there that, people could pull from who are interested.
Sure. So, I joke around and I say, just go outside, like start there, you know, um, but that's not as always as easy as it may be. And I do appreciate the fact that my school is uh, located next to a gorgeous, beautiful park, established park. And not all of the urban schools in our district are, and I worked with some educators where they were like, we've got a tree, and so it's okay, then everything is around that tree. That tree is valuable to on so many levels. So start there. I actually did a lesson with New York State Park educators where I took them out to a parking lot, and did a lesson in a parking lot, because we have to be able to do this and not allow boundaries to make things a no, right? Or barriers that make it a no, and so it can be as simple as a chemistry teacher in our district just came to see the nature center, and he's like, oh my gosh. And I said, you can't get overwhelmed by what's in here. You got to, it doesn't have to look like this, but you got to start somewhere, so whether it is simply a plant, that students become connected to, but I I think the important thing is really getting kids outside. And so there was a another teacher that talked to me about, they were close to Lake Erie, And so he was able to take kids outside and pay attention to the way the clouds look, because you can see the lake effects cloud formations, and that wall of cloud, right? So knowing the space that you're in and really connecting with it yourself first, right? It's kind of like anything. You got to be connected to do this first.
Yeah.
And so using kind of what is natural to you and then knowing your area and utilizing your area. There is nature everywhere, right? So it doesn't have to be in a place where you have white-tailed deer walking by, though most places do now, right? Or there's urban nature all over, and rural is the same. There's a community near us that I've been talking with too, because um just because they're in rural settings, kids are still not spending time
Yeah.
outside, and then let alone they might be outside, maybe some, but they're not connected, so they're not getting that value piece. And so I would say, one, start with yourself. Two, come from an asset mind instead of a barrier mind. What are the assets that we do have? What do we have access to? Um, don't be afraid to bring nature in, though I try very hard to do that respectfully. We talk about things being nature artifacts. We talk about returning things to nature. Nature stays in nature, but we can take pine cones inside and we can draw them, write about them, learn about them, touch them, smell them, all those things. But then returning them. Um, and, some of the things I think it's important is every kid gets a journal. Paper, pencil, pencil, your journal can get wet, it can fall in a puddle, and your notes will still be there. It doesn't run like pens. So uh and a wagon and a clipboard. I've cut up yoga mats so that kids can sit on the ground,
Mm.
because a lot of times they're not ready to sit on the ground. And now a lot of times, like, we don't need that, we'll just sit on the dirt. It's okay if we get a little dirty, but providing different things to um, help kids feel comfortable, and thinking about it in terms of that way. And then don't overplan. Teachers love to overplan, right? You need every minute uh, planned out in your class. And nature-based learning is the opposite, right? Is allowing things to slow down. It's allowing time for when nature does nature, right? If you're outside and it starts to rain, but stay in the rain a little bit, and those kinds of things. Uh,
What a
I
relief for everyone, right? I
right,
mean, teacher, you don't have to plan anything. Student, and not, fretting. Oh my
right.
gosh, we have all these activities. I can just be out here. Yeah.
That that is so true. And we are doing research with a local university here called SUNY Brockport. And we're looking at teachers too, and how they change after being outside for at
Mm.
least 30 minutes, and things like that. So and then in terms of support, couple of things. Children in Nature Network is fantastic. They have a whole area of research that I think, if teachers or someone wants to try this, and not just be able to say, hey, it's good for kids to go outside, but they can come at it with, here's some research that backs why this is so valuable. I have a bunch of different social media that I try to manage the best I can. Another teacher friend of mine who's a lot younger said, would you like help with that? I said, yes, please. Um, so I try to put a lot of things on social media and share what we do. Our school does have a website. It's Anna Murray Douglas Academy, school number 12, Rochester City School District. If you just Google that, our website comes up. Um, I think most of my social media is KLS, which is Kyra Lynn Stephenson, my initials, underscore nature ED, like Ed. And I just started my own consulting business called Nature Mind Solutions. With my goal is to come at it with solutions so that people can be doing nature-based learning in terms of educators, pre-service teachers. If you're a adult who spent your life in education in a classroom in four walls, this is new to you too. And so learning, having our newest teachers understand that nature-based learning is, and this, ways to do it is obviously going to have a bigger impact. And Rochester, New York has a Children and Outdoor Bill of Rights. We call it a COBOR, which is from Children and Nature Network. And I'm part of the Nature Everywhere team that is working on developing the action plan so that the 40,000 youth of Rochester, New York meet the goals of our Children Outdoor Bill of Rights. So we are a buzzing city when it comes to getting nature-based learning in an urban setting going, and a lot of people working on this. So, I would love to be support for anyone. As you can probably tell, I'm very passionate about this and I can talk about it for hours. But I'm very good at helping with getting things started and coming up with ideas to get this going in places. And then Rochester Ecology Partners is another good resource, at least locally for us, and could be a resource for some people as well.
That's fantastic. Well, in summary, do you have any final thoughts on, next steps, what you would like to see in your own work, or across the country, or where this goes next, how you can build on what you've already done?
Uh, Gosh, when you get to experience kids with that radical joy that I come back to on a daily basis. This is hard work. This is the hardest I think I've ever worked in my life. And it's not easy, and some people, it's really hard for people to kind of understand this a little bit. It's a little out of the box. But the impact and the value of this is incredible. I mean, it's truly transformational with so many of our kids and our people that have experienced trauma. That I believe this is every child deserves this, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so any way that this can grow in our education system, anyway, any piece of it is going to be a benefit. And so I'd like to see it in more schools. Of course, I'm dedicated to the urban school setting that I'm in. Um, but I know that this can be beneficial no matter where. And then I think helping it, like I said, kind of at the higher ed level, and we're looking at different universities, and different universities are kind of looking at it too, going, how can this be beneficial on the college level? Not just in the education world, but even with college students. And so I think right now it's sky's the limit, right? Um, and having more discussions and collectively working on this in terms of getting partners together and allies in this, I think is a goal of mine as well.
And if people want to contact you, your website, could you say that again, that you've set up?
Sure. So the school, I think the easiest thing could actually be email.
Sure.
Um, if that I think works the best, and now let me get it right. So it is KLS. So if you think about my initials, Kyra Lynn Stephenson, right? So KLS Nature ED. So natureed@gmail.com.
Wow. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. This has really been enjoyable. I really appreciate your time. More importantly, I appreciate all the work you're doing. And I know the kids you're working with are obviously benefiting greatly, but I think people listening, will get a lot out of this. And, you're modeling something that, obviously can be expanded upon. And I'm sure other people who listen to this are going to figure out ways to do that. So
Mhm.
Thanks for being a spark and, starting what hopefully turns out to be a blaze. So,
Lee, thank you so much. I
yeah, but
really
not a
appreciate it.
catastrophic fire, just a good
No, no.
fire that, yeah. So, anyway, well, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. It's been a pleasure and wish you the best of luck going forward.
Oh, Lee, I appreciate the time and this has been a great conversation. I hope we have more down the road.
Oh, I look forward to it. Thank you.
Sounds great. Thank you.